would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand spanking new week and a fresh new edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Oh, folks, it happens to everybody. Little self-doubt creeps in, a little second-guessing. I've had one of those weekends. Been making progress and getting things done, but boy, I tell you, it's definitely been a time of probably too much reflection. I should just go. I should just pull the trigger. So yeah, it happens to everybody. Maybe it doesn't happen to some. Maybe there are some investors out there or folks who make big decisions based on what their beliefs are, or based on what the data they're seeing tells them, and they never have a moment. I'm guessing most of you do, right? Before we jump into it, let me remind everyone that the best way to reach out is through the website, therebelbroker.com. Click on the contacts item in the menu bar, and from there you can send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. And, I would like to thank a couple of listeners who, probably Friday, I believe I saw those messages come in on Friday and Saturday. Just very encouraging stuff, right? I get the usual questions, but every once in a while, someone will just share appreciation for the show, and I love being someone who gets you thinking about things, or providing you with information or opinions or perspectives maybe that you hadn't thought about, looking at markets in different ways, not just in terms of what the headlines tell us. So I like to think that I provide that, and every once in a while, some of you will send me such a poignant and well put together message that just kind of recharges the battery, and I want to thank you all for that, because it's not lost on me. I just want you to know I don't just immediately delete those. Those make me smile and make me happy that I do the show, because that really is the reason why. And I can't, what's funny is I can't really even put my finger on what it is that has got me thinking, second guessing my plan. And you, for those of you who've been with me for a while, you know that my plan is a blanket term that covers plan A, B, C, D, and all the others that I tend to come up with. And I'm going to be on. I tend to be an overthinker. I tend to, particularly when it's my own stuff. Looking back, I'm very proud of the advice I've given clients. Because it's been mostly right. And the funny thing is, and I've mentioned this before, I wish I took my own advice more. And it's really strange, and I suppose it's like the person who cleans other people's houses for a living and then their own house is messy. Is it that kind of thing? Or maybe it's just because it's not my money involved and I'm able to make this disconnected view of things. But at least I can fall back and say, wait a minute, Robert, just look at your situation. What would you suggest that someone else do? Let's pretend this was someone else. What would you tell them to do? And that usually brings me back. But even that was tough this weekend. I guess I'm disappointed by the delays, and I'm letting that sort of infect what's going on. And another thing that's funny is in my own life, I don't like conflict. You know what I mean? I don't. What's really funny is I embrace it with not with my clients, meaning I have conflict with my clients, but I mean on behalf of my clients, I am totally willing to be that guy. And what's bizarre to me is when it's my own personal stuff, I'm less so. And I don't know why. Again, it's a disconnect between what we do for ourselves personally versus how we treat other people. or not even how we treat other people, but how we're acting when we're acting on someone else's behalf, I guess really is what I meant. And I really had to embrace that in my own life over the last weekend. I had several things happen that were not client related, that were just me related. And I'd been putting off this one particular interaction. And then once I said, all right, listen, I know exactly how this needs to play out. I know exactly what I need to say. They're not going to want to hear it, but it needs to be said. And of course I overthought it because that's what I do. And then I called them and went with just the initial, here's the bottom line. Here's the thing. And then that was it. I had planned out how this conversation was going to go. I had anticipated what this other person was going to say with my opening remark, and that didn't happen. They just said, okay. And I'm like, all right. So here's this thing I'd put off for days because I just didn't want to do it. I was dreading it. And there it was, and it was over. So it was irrational and it was stupid. So I have had a few days filled with irrational and stupid. So what do you do? But what's funny is I'm not sure my advice would work for you, because I can go back, because at least I've been doing this a really long time. I've been doing this since 1988, right? So I've been giving people advice, and I like to think the advice has gotten better over the years. There are a few pieces of advice I regret from those first few years of real estate. But at least I can go back and say, listen, it's not like you've left this wake of destruction behind you with all of these people who wish they hadn't taken your advice. So at least I can fall back and say, if I can just disconnect myself from the personal aspect, I'd be all right. But I realize most of you don't have that, right? So what do you do? I think that you just have to depend on your own rationality. And I don't know why this may be a tangent, and I apologize if it is, because your life is together and you don't ever have these moments. But I think the way to manage it is to do what I did, but just don't have a client, right? So what did I do? I did it with real people. What you can do is simply play pretend. Now, one thing I've always suggested that you do is whenever you're trying to get into a marketplace, get a regular email going so that you're getting all the properties that come in, all the properties that are going listing. And if you want to go out there and check out all the open houses as they come up, do that. Get to really know your markets. Get some hands-on with the process and do everything except for actually write that offer, unless you're totally there. But if you're suffering from that self-doubt, if you're just, God, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, pretend, right? My son is doing this with stocks, for instance. He has graduated from practicing to doing it for real. So, and my son's only 16. A couple of years ago, he has got sort of a shepherded E-Trade account that his parents are on. But prior to that, he was just saying, okay, let's pretend I bought this stock. And then he'd track it as if he had bought it. And he was making money doing it. So we gave him a chunk of money to do stuff with, and he's doing great, right? He has overcome that through practicing with fake money. You can do the exact same thing in real estate. You can say, hey, you know what? I would buy this property, and make a note of it. And at the day you bought it, write down all the numbers that you believed at the time. So what you would have purchased it for, what the rent was going for in that area. Because remember, if you're a member of the Rebel Underground, you can watch that video that'll help you go through that whole process of doing broader broader analyzing of metro areas into smaller areas that you'd pick, right? And when you find that property that feels good, write that sucker down and get all the details in. And maybe every quarter, check in on it. Maybe trust Zillow a little bit. If Zillow was pretty close on the mark when you went that first time, maybe you note what the Zillow estimate was at that time. Or if you're working with a real estate agent, just give them the addresses of the properties that you thought were good and have them do a market analysis. And you yourself can just check and see what's happened with rents in those areas by using sites like Trulia, Zillow, Rent.com, that kind of stuff. And that'll take time, but if it builds your confidence, great. I think that's a great way to build up a level of confidence where you can say, when it wasn't the real deal, it worked out. Everything came out okay. So why shouldn't I go ahead and do this for real? Just to sort of build it up. So anyway, I hope that's helpful in some way. I'm assuming everyone has these moments. Maybe I'm the one idiot who just completely has these moments where the doubt just creeps right in and just beats me up. But I'm assuming I'm not. I'm assuming at least some percentage of you find yourself in the same boat from time to time, and maybe even you have hovered over that document, that very first offer, and just couldn't do it, right? Because it was just too scary of a proposition. So maybe something like this would help you out. And particularly since we're moving into a time where I think things are going to get more challenging. And it's the challenge will range, right? And there's an article that came out from Peak Prosperity. Maybe that's one of the first things we can talk about today. And on the one hand, it's like, I always hate confirmation bias. Whenever you have an opinion and then you see confirmation of it, I look for opinions counter to my own. And then I try to read the details of what supports that opinion to see if it sways me away from my opinion. I think everyone should do that. I think that is an extremely healthy way to come to better conclusions. Try to disprove yourself as frequently as you can. I think it'll make you more mentally nimble in analyzing properties, and it won't let you be overridden by either optimism or just only looking for things that verify your opinion, right? So there's a guy named Steen Jacobson. He's the chief investment officer at Saxo Bank. And he believes there's a 60% probability of a recession in the next 18 months. And he talks about the world economic engine slowing to a standstill. And it's concerning. The only other thing concerning here is he has some odd facial hair, which maybe I'm being too oddly biased, but there it is. Take a look for yourself. See what you think. The credit impulse, and I'm quoting now, defined as the net new credit to GDP, which is gross domestic product, has gone negative in the world for the first time since the start of the Great Recession that we had in 2008, 2009. And the lead is coming again, as always, in the next 10 to 15 years from China. Basically, China's net credit impulse has gone from double-digit positive to almost double-digit negatives. And I can tell you, having just been on the ground in China for a couple of times in the last 3 months, everything's at a standstill. This is very important, as China is responsible for 50% of all new growth, as well as a huge chunk of every new credit dollar that has been created in recent years. Another thing to keep in mind is how many businesses of ours have changed a lot of their business plans based on making Chinese people customers, right? Whether we're talking about Apple and iPhones or automobiles, whatever, we've been trying to break into the Chinese market in these areas, and that assumes people there have the money to spend. And it wasn't that long ago that nobody in China had money to spend on much of anything. So if there's a huge dump, that would be a bad thing, not only for folks in China, but for those of us who are attempting to sell things to people in China. Just to take, and I'm going back to the story here, just to take the long story shorter. So basically what we've figured out is that the credit impulse leads by 9 months. In other words, the pickup we saw in economic activity in December and January was created 9 months prior. And if you look back to Q1 of 2016, we had the worst start to the year in the equity market for a very long time. Consequently, the central banks panicked, especially the ECB. And I don't know what the ECB is, European Consumer Bank. I'm guessing, the Bank of Japan, and to some extent the Federal Reserve. This made huge credit impulse that peaked in April, May of last year. Fast forward 9 months, and we saw a peak in economic activity and inflation. Ever since, we've seen a dramatic deterioration, and this is all based on this 9-month lead, which is coming out of China, now been confirmed to be negative as well as the U.S. I know it's a long answer, but I think it's important information. Basically, I'm thinking right now, unfortunately, that there's a 60% probability for a recession inside the next 18 months. And probably the most likely period for that to happen would be the end of this year because, of course, Trump has not delivered. So there you go. There'll be a link to this. There's a podcast associated with it if you'd like to hear more. I'd want to see more data, to be honest, to verify this 9-month thing. But we've talked about that before. We've talked about leading indicators, and he's basically talking about this being sort of a classic leading indicator. And it sounds like a reasonable thing to expect. And particularly since it is another one of those things that shares in common with the recession we experienced in 2008, 2009. And we've talked about a lot of other things that feed into that feel very similar, that it sets a stage very similarly to what we saw last time, which is one reason why I've expressed so much concern and trying to share with you all those various bits of data that tend to do that. Now, next on the Hit Parade today, we're going to talk a little bit about some construction trends that are going on in Southern California that actually kind of ends on an interesting note that could indicate a lot of stopping in terms of those types of developments, at least coastal type development. But we'll talk about that in a second. First, we'll take a quick break, so don't go away.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is from the Los Angeles Times, and I thought it was interesting because it starts off with this kind of cheerful headline: "New real estate developments abound up and down the coast, but challenges persist." And it lists off a few that I think are kind of encouraging. Ocean-hugging communities stretching from Malibu to Dana Point, builders face intense demand for limited space, resistance from regulators and residents, and the logistical and environmental challenges. Quote, William A. Witt, chief executive of real estate company Related California: "This will always be some of the most coveted real estate in California. Because of that supply and demand imbalance, the cost of land has escalated significantly." Now, just as a side note, I know I haven't talked about this in a while, so this might ring a bell for folks who've been listening for more than a year. You'll remember that my very first plan was to purchase land and build a home on it, simply because that represented the greatest bang for the buck. The bottom line is, once it was all said and done, I'd have a property that was probably worth about $300,000 to $400,000 more than what I paid for it in terms of acquiring the lot and getting the property built. You'll also recall that the primary problem I had was getting a lot. There were 2 lots that were promising, and then when I went and looked at the flood information on them, it was in the worst of the floodplain, and I just wasn't interested in that. I have listed homes that were in that segment, and while they were okay, they had huge problems relating to managing the flood issues, because even in a regular rain, you'd get flooding, and most of the builders who really built had to really over-engineer their foundations so that the homes were raised way up, and then there was this pump system that would exist under the house to keep things dry. I just wasn't interested in going down that route, so I wanted to be at least one layer of intensity out of the worst of the floodplain, and found a couple of properties, but those ended up going unbelievably fast. So it was a huge problem. And I continue to search. I have a search continuously running for lots. I am perfectly willing to derail the whole process I'm doing right now in favor of buying a lot. In fact, if I could find a lot right now, I would buy it. I would still sell my house as it is right now, and then I'd put a trailer on that lot until the house is built. to just make things work out that way. And what's really great is that depending on the size of the lot, it's also a scenario where in the areas I'm interested, you could put 2 buildings as long as the second building is under 2,000 square feet. So it could be awesome. It could be one of those things where a huge chunk of my mortgage is actually paid by someone renting a 3-bedroom, 2,000 square foot home that's also on my lot. Well, I realize that's a long story to tell based on something that's not happening, but that was the plan at the time, and just has been stopped by this fact that even up here, not just Southern California, but Northern California, lots are just impossible to find. And the ones you do find are going to be way out there that have no services coming to them. You can find plenty of lots that don't have power, water, sewer, or anything, but try getting a loan on anything like that. Loans for those kinds of properties are nearly impossible if you don't at least have power coming to the property. And then there's a whole other magnitude of issues relating to going solar. There's only certain lenders that'll even deal with those kind of scenarios. So it opens up a can of worms, and also would make it much more difficult to rent. So the criteria I had was it still needed to be enough within the range of the city and the freeway and everything else that renting it would not be a problem. So, all right. The article continues. Playa Vista, home to offices for Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, has new residential units for sale in the Runway mixed-use complex, as well as dozens of condos in the Sea Bluff project set to be completed in 2018. So these are ones coming online next year. In Marina del Rey, the developer Amley is wrapping up construction on 585 residential units. It's a $165 million development, which broke ground 2 years ago and is designed to look like a boathouse. Also features outdoor areas and a retail component. In San Pedro, the first of 676 single-family homes, condos, flats, and townhouses in the High Park housing plan is slated for completion this year, and the rest set to be finished by 2021. Now, remember what we talked about before. Some interesting theories were that we weren't really going to see inventory coming back to a normal level till 2020, or in other words, inventory wasn't going to start matching demand till 2020. It's interesting that these things kind of sync up with that timeline. Initial plans to build 2,300 homes quickly met with controversy and were scaled back. Huntington Beach is busy. The Pacific City complex broke ground in the fall after a fraught, decades-long development process, and this year began welcoming tenants into the first of its 516 luxury units. The residences, marketed as classic Southern California beach living, are part of a retail and hospitality project spread across 31 acres. Signal Landmark wants to build 36 townhomes at its Windward project, the site for Shia Homes Parkside Estates, which will feature 111 single-family homes. They're undergoing grading and infrastructure installation now. Near the Bella Terra Mall, the 510 dwellings of Pedigo Products Monogram Apartments plan are halfway through construction. Several more projects. Some of these obviously are doing what we've been talking about in terms of catering to the luxury market. Let's see. But there's another interesting comment here and something we've talked about. But there's not much room to grow. Often, only luxury developers are able to work out profitable margins. And then only by pairing with the government or by crafting mixed-use proposals that combine residential units with retail and entertainment options. Now, this article does not mention it, but Southern California, when I used an example late last year of costs relating to developing, the community that I was referring to was in Southern California, where they were charging $100,000 per unit to developers. So if you were building a home and there were 50 homes, you just in addition to everything else you had to pay relating to regulations and fees, all of that stuff. And remember, when these developers develop this stuff, frequently the cities will also say, and you know what, you need to widen the road that leads there. So it not only becomes a cost in order to build what you need to build, it becomes a cost relating to changing infrastructure in the surrounding area. I've heard of others where the developers had to buy artwork, public artworks that would be displayed around the area. There's all kinds of goofy crap, but the bottom line is that in addition to all that, all the regulations, all the compliance, all the things they have to pay, simply right off the top, they're going to charge you an extra $100,000. And the point I was making was that is not something the developer pays, because the bottom line is that cost gets passed on to you. And Southern, I can't remember the specific city. We'd have to go back probably a little over a year to look that back up again. But The point being is it's not even a Southern California exclusive thing. It's happening in a lot of different areas of California. And it just makes it even more difficult to build homes for folks at an entry level where the folks who build them can make a return on the investment that's reasonable. Affordable housing by and large is not economically viable on expensive land, according to Stuart A. Gabriel, director of the Ziman Real Estate Center at UCLA. Also, they mention winning government permission is also difficult. The California Coastal Commission, we've done lots of stories on the California Coastal Commission, has purview over oceanside development. And keep in mind, that is a broadly defined, quote unquote, coastal. I've seen folks that are pretty inland from the coast who have fallen under the control of the California Coastal Commission. It seems to me if there's any wet dirt anywhere near your property in California, somehow the California Coastal Commission is going to have something to say about your property. The agency tends to favor projects that are open to the public, such as hotels and retail outlets, over private individual build-outs. Related, California wrapped its most recent Southern California coastal project 3 years ago in Santa Monica with help from the city. The Ocean Avenue South complex, the first to be built on Ocean Avenue in more than 2 decades, features condos and rental units. Many coastal residents are development shy, resisting construction larger than a small cluster of homes and raising concerns about traffic congestion and building density. In Newport Beach, the proposed 900-home Banning Ranch mixed-use development continues to hang in limbo after years of being embroiled in controversy. The state Supreme Court in March ordered builder Newport Banning Ranch to amend its environmental impact report before continuing the project, and the company sued the Coastal Commission after the agency denied the developer's latest plan in September. And this stuff just goes on. It finishes off with increasingly constituents are also concerned about climate change and its effects on the coastline. Building sites in Florida, New York already feature safeguards against the effect of global warming and coastal erosion. Southern California could soon follow suit. So it's a perfect example. It's encouraging because yes, there are projects and they're coming online next year, probably some later this year. We've got the same thing happening up here in Northern California with still a little bit too much leaning towards apartment style complexes. And again, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the latest list of properties coming online and how they were all at the luxury end. That continues. In fact, the latest list shows more multi-million-dollar homes coming online with no homes in addition to the ones we talked about 2 weeks ago. So all these trends are continuing on. It's like we can't just shake bad habits and move forward. We've had some encouraging news, so maybe my area is just one that's going to have this problem. Maybe there'll be better opportunities for folks in other areas. I am starting to see, I remember mentioning more than a couple of months ago, that in my area, I was seeing a interesting increase in instances of folks reducing price, of instances of homes staying on the market for longer, and of inventory accumulating. That's starting to change. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen inventory drop in that key 3-bedroom, 2+ bath demo, which tends to be the vast majority of folks. Those homes are now thinner on the ground. At one point, I think I was seeing 25 or 30 properties like that were under 800,000. Now there's maybe 10 or 11 that are still on the market. So definitely a shift there as well. Nothing totally unexpected. We figured that simply because of the way the supply and demand situation currently is, that would be a thing. So it's sort of just coming true. It is what it is. You need to figure out in your marketplace what that dynamic is, because absolutely there are areas where the opposite is occurring, where we're seeing more inventory accumulating. And as we've talked about on this show, none of the sexy markets appear to be where you want to rent. In fact, there was an article last week about area where they're doing that balancing act. Does it make more sense to rent here or buy here? And it's actually to the point now it makes more sense to rent in many California communities rather than buy. The equation has definitely flipped. If you're going to buy something new, the odds are you're going to pay a lot more than you would if you simply rented a similar home. So that spells bad things for folks who want to invest, right? If you start to see rental rates freezing at a certain point, then your ability to buy a property and get a reasonable rent, unless you're putting more cash down, just becomes a more challenging math problem. And you might have to be willing to accept lower return on investment because you'd have to tie more of your cash into the property to make it positive. All right, folks, I do hope that has been helpful for you. I know the first chunk of the show was really sort of a weird little encounter session in terms of dealing with doubt when that rears its ugly head. I hope it was helpful for some of you who might find yourself in a similar position. It's just important, I think, to push through and stick with it. I don't know if those are easy to say. I feel like I'm just throwing out not very helpful things to get you through it. But hopefully what we had to say at the beginning of the show will be useful for you in terms of overcoming those concerns. All right, folks, as always, truly appreciate you spending your valuable time with me. You have no idea how much I appreciate the fact that you're willing to spend your valuable time with me. And I certainly hope you walk away with more value and things to think about than the amount of time you invested in listening to the show. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you all next time.